Thank you for the invitation to speak at Ghost Day. It's my pleasure to tell you about the AI4K12 Initiative. This is a joint project of AAAI, the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, and CSTA, the Computer Science Teachers Association. CSTA is the primary professional organization for K12 computer science teachers. Our project is funded by the National Science Foundation, and we've also had generous support from the Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science. The mission of the AI4K12 initiative is to develop national guidelines for teaching AI in K12. These are modeled after the CSTA computing standards. So we've had computing standards since 2011 in the US, and the most recent standards came out in 2017. But these standards say almost nothing about AI. There were only 2 sentences about AI. So the AI4K12 initiative was created to remedy that. We're seeking to define what students should know about AI and what they should be able to do. And we're defining these guidelines for 4 grade bands, K-2, 3-5, 6-8, and 9-12. We're also developing a curated resource directory of AI learning resources that are appropriate for K-12. And we're building a community of educators, researchers, and resource developers interested in K-12 AI education. One of the first things we did was release a list of 5 big ideas in AI, and you can see them here. This is the organizing framework for the guidelines. So our 5 big ideas: perception, that computers perceive the world using sensors; representation and reasoning, agents maintain representations of the world and use them for reasoning; learning, computers can learn from data; natural interaction. This is a broad area. It covers a number of topics, including natural language processing and common sense reasoning. And then finally, societal impact in the center. AI can impact society in both positive and negative ways. And this includes things like economic impacts of AI and also issues of ethical AI. So today I'm going to focus on big idea 3, machine learning. But before I do that, because learning is intimately connected to reasoning, I want to talk about what we want students to come away from as far as understanding reasoning. And so here are 2 key things that we want every student to know. One of them is the idea that there are different types of reasoning problems. So classification, prediction, search, all of these are covered in various places in the guidelines. And the other thing we want them to understand is the difference between a reasoning problem and a reasoning model. So reasoning models include things like decision trees, neural networks, the various algorithms that are used to solve reasoning problems. And these reasoning models have internal representations called parameters that can be adjusted. And that's what sets the stage for teaching children about machine learning. So big idea 3, computers can learn from data. This is what we want students to understand about that. We have a set of key insights that we hope by the end of high school, when students are ready to enter college, they will have acquired these key insights and understand them. And so I want to cover those briefly now. Here are the first 2 of these 4 key insights for machine learning. First is just the definition of machine learning, and this is a common definition, just reworded a little bit from the version you usually see in the literature. But the idea is that machine learning allows a computer to acquire behaviors without people explicitly programming those behaviors. So that's pretty close to everybody's textbook definition of machine learning. But the next thing, the next key insight, is one that many adults lack. And in fact, many introductions to machine learning for laymen often get this wrong. What we want people to understand is that learning new behaviors results from changes that the learning algorithm makes to the internal representations of a reasoning model. So you have some reasoning model of your choice, maybe a decision tree, maybe a neural network. That model has parameters. And what the learning algorithm is doing is changing the parameters of a reasoner. So it's constructing a reasoner to produce the behavior that we seek to produce. Here are the next two key insights that we want students to come away with. And it's not just students, this applies to teachers as well. Teacher professional development is a big issue in teaching AI in K-12. So we want teachers to have these insights too. So many people know that machine learning requires lots of training data. Again, you'll see that in many popular explanations of machine learning for the public, but they don't often explain exactly why that is. So we want people to have a little bit more sophisticated understanding. And so we want them to understand why large amounts of training data are required. It's because the reasoning model, if the reasoning model is powerful, if it's capable of a great variety of behaviors, then the learning algorithm's job is to get the reasoning model to behave in a particular way. And there are many possible choices of behavior. So the only way the learning algorithm can know what the right parameters are, it needs enough training data to narrow down its choices. That's what we want people to walk away with. And then finally, yet another area where popular descriptions of machine learning often fall short is they don't distinguish between the construction of the reasoner and the application of the reasoner, that these are separate phases. And in fact, once the machine learning model is trained, the learning algorithm is out of the picture. And we're just taking the reasoner that was constructed and applying that. So we express that here, saying the reasoning model constructed by the machine learning algorithm can be applied to new data to solve problems or make decisions. So our hope is that everyone who graduates high school will at least have these four major insights into machine learning. Of course, we want them to have much more than that, but this is what every educated high school student should know about machine learning. So the next thing we did, we were defining for every one of the 5 big ideas, we're defining a grade band progression chart, modeled again after the CSTA computing standards. And to produce that progression chart, we need a list of concepts. So we have 3 major concepts in the machine learning category. Major concept A is the nature of learning, and that covers things like human learning versus machine learning, and how do they differ? Issues of finding patterns in data. What is it like to train a model? How do you train a model? And then this distinction between constructing a reasoner and using a reasoner. Major concept B is neural networks, and you could argue that this really belongs in big idea 2, which covers reasoning, but neural networks are so closely tied to machine learning that we felt it was more appropriate to put neural networks in the machine learning section. So we want students to know the structure of a neural network, that is, what are these units and connections, weights, output functions, and then we want them to know something about weight adjustment. And then finally, major concept C is data sets, and that includes notion of feature sets, of the problems associated with large data sets, and the issues of bias in the training data, and how that can affect the decision-making behavior of the trained model. So these are our major concepts, and from this, we produce a grade band progression chart. And so this is one page. This is the first page of the 7-page grade band progression chart for big idea 3. So let me break this down a little bit for you. The columns here are the grade bands. So K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. These are our 4 grade bands. The rows are the concepts. And so here you see the first 2 concepts. So these are both part of major concept A, nature of learning. 3A1 is humans versus machines. So how do people learn? how is machine learning different than human learning? And 3A2 is about finding patterns in data. And so these concepts that can be addressed at all these different grade bands, we just go into more depth and more complexity as you get to the higher grades. Every one of the cells in this chart has at least two components. The first is the LO, the learning objective, and that's what we want students to be able to do, some skill that they can demonstrate. And the second one is the EU, the enduring understanding. That's what we want students to know. There may be additional content in the cell. So some of these cells have an unpacked field where we provide a little bit more explanation of the LO or the EU, because the LO and the EU are supposed to be concise. And then in some cases, we also have suggested activities that people could perform to help students acquire that skill or that understanding. So this is a 7-page PDF file that's available at the AI4K12.org website. This is just the first draft that's publicly released. We are looking for feedback, comments from the public. We encourage you to take a look at this and let us know what you think. So let me move on now to talk about learning activities and some of the many tools that are becoming available specifically for teaching AI to the K-12 audience. And the first one is usable even with kindergartners. It's called Teachable Machine. It comes from Google. And what it does is it allows you to train a visual classifier. It can use the webcam on your laptop. And so you can, for example, teach it to distinguish, say, a thumbs up sign from a peace sign. So you do that by using the webcam to record some training examples. And then it just takes a few minutes to do this demo. It trains up a model. And then you can make gestures in front of the camera, and it will classify and tell you what it thinks you're doing. You can train this to recognize fruits. You can recognize cats or dogs. This uses transfer learning. It's built on top of MobileNet, which is the deep neural network. It's a black box demo, so the details are hidden from the user. They can't see how it works, but they can try it out to see, where it succeeds, where it fails. You can go back and add more training data. So this is a very compelling demo. And like all good demos, it runs in the browser. There's no software to download and install, which can be a problem in many school districts. Let me move on to another machine learning topic, decision trees, and how we address these at different levels. So even very young kids can learn about a decision tree using something like the Guess the Animal game. So this would be done as an unplugged activity on a blackboard rather than on the computer. But in the Guess the Animal game, you can give students a pre-constructed tree like this and have them play the Guess the Animal game to figure out what animal the person is thinking of. But you can also, once you've done that, you can teach them a very simple procedure for growing the tree. So if you pick an animal that's not in this tree, you're going to end up at a leaf node that's the wrong animal. And then there's a simple procedure of asking a new question that distinguishes the two animals and then adding a node to the tree. So students can, even in very early grades, they can get the idea of representing knowledge formally in a tree structure like this. They can get the idea of a reasoning algorithm. The reasoning algorithm is the one that starts at the root, asks the questions, and then progresses until it finds a leaf. And they can get the idea of a learning algorithm, which is the procedure that adds nodes to the tree. So they can do all this without writing any code. A little bit older students can start looking at problems of finding patterns in data where the pattern isn't necessarily obvious. So here's some examples of fish. And I stole these graphics from code.org's AI for Oceans demo, which is a different machine learning demo, but I like their graphics, so I borrowed them. So here we have some fish that are classed as safe and some fish that are classed as poisonous. And you might ask students to figure out what makes a fish be poisonous. And that's fine. You can then introduce them to the notion of feature vectors. So here are some features we can use to describe the fish. We can encode those features. And so now every fish is reduced to a feature vector. And then there's a wonderful tool called Machine Learning for Kids. This was produced by Dale Lane at IBM. And Machine Learning for Kids will allow you to define your classes, define your instances, and it will learn a decision tree for you. And then it will graphically display this decision tree. So here's the decision tree that solves the problem on the previous slide about how to tell a safe fish from a poisonous fish. So this website, machinelearningforkids.co.uk, it has a large number of pre-built exercises, and Dale has a book out, Machine Learning for Kids, and we've been using this with some middle school students, and it's proven quite popular. So this is a great resource. Let me talk a little bit about working with real data sets. So code.org, which has done a lot of great work in CS education in the K-12 space. They recently released their own tool that they call AI Lab, which is really a machine learning lab. And this is using a K nearest neighbor approach, not a decision tree. The students don't know that, but the code.org folks told me that's what it's doing. And the cool thing about this tool is that you can work with real data sets. So they provide, some of these data sets came from Kaggle, some of them came from other public sources. And so they have, they're somewhere from a few dozen to a few thousand instances in these training sets. And you can train classifiers, you can train predictors. There's nice tools for browsing the data, so you can look at some statistics of the data, and they have tools for measuring the accuracy of the classifier as well. So this is suitable for middle school students, middle school and up. It's a very nice tool, just recently released, very friendly. Again, everything runs in the browser. Let me briefly move on to neural networks now. So neural networks get a lot of press for machine learning, and the public sometimes thinks that machine learning and neural networks are the same thing. They also sometimes think that machine learning and AI are the same thing. So we hope the guidelines will help people understand that none of those are true. But we want students to understand something about neural networks, even if they can't understand all the math behind backpropagation. So this is what that looks like. In very early grades, they can learn the basic idea of linear decision function. So here's, can I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? I have to have all the ingredients. And you can teach this to kids in elementary school. When they get a little older, we can teach them a learning algorithm. And this is the Perceptron Learning rule. So here we have this problem, is this dog going to bite me? We have a bunch of experts. Experts have votes, which correspond to weights. And here we're tallying up the votes, and the experts are saying no, but some experts are saying yes. And so the next step of the learning algorithm is to get the correct answer and then make adjustments to the weights so that we make a better decision next time. And we can show students how that maps directly onto setting the weights in a one neuron neural net. So this is middle school level neural networks. They're not going to get backpropagation. Even in high school, they'll be aware of backpropagation, but they will not learn the mathematics of backpropagation in a normal AI class. Now, there are high schools implementing advanced CS electives, including machine learning electives, and in some cases, they do actually teach students the math of backprop. Some of them even have them implement backprop in Python, and that's great. That's a wonderful thing, but it's too much to ask for guidelines that are supposed to apply for every student. But there is a wonderful online tool, again from Google. This is called TensorFlow Playground. That allows students to graphically display a neural network and they can train it on selected problems. They can examine the weights and thresholds. They can see the output behavior. And so even if students don't have the math, they can get the basic idea of training weights in a network to get it to make to solve a classification problem. So you see this range of tools, increasingly sophisticated tools, but still oriented for the non-computer scientist. And more of these tools are becoming available every year. There's a lot of exciting developments happening in the K-12 AI space. So just to wrap up, this is sort of a summary of some of the things we want students to be able to do. In K2, they can identify patterns in labeled data, maybe look at those fish, for example, and try and figure out what's going on with the fish. In grades 3 to 5, they can already train a classifier using machine learning tools. By grades 6 to 8, they can be talking about the effects of bias in training sets. And by high school, they should be able to talk about constructing a reasoner, how a reasoner has parameters. They'd be weights for a neural network. They'd be nodes for a decision tree. And the learning algorithm is different from the reasoning algorithm. The learning algorithm's job is to adjust the parameters of the reasoner. So I hope I've gotten you excited about the idea of teaching these machine learning concepts to K-12 students. We'd love to have people join us. We have a mailing list, the AI4K12 mailing list. We are building a community of researchers, educators, and resource developers. You can join the mailing list by going to AI4K12.org. There's a sign up link at the bottom of the main page. We'd love to have people review the grade band progression charts, send us feedback on those. You can act locally. You can go to your local school district and ask them, are you doing anything in AI education? And would you like some help learning about that and maybe thinking about how you can add AI to your curriculum? And finally, if you're a researcher, think about what you can do to make your research accessible to K-12 students. Maybe you could make a demo, maybe you could make a video. If you think about how to explain your research to the public and to potential funders, you've done a lot of the work that you'll need to do to think about how to explain it to K-12 students. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. That was really interesting presentation and a lot of interesting resources. And I wish I was taught artificial intelligence this way. We have a question. We have some questions from audience. The first question is, do you think we can learn something about AI from kids, the way they approach it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So kids today are growing up in a totally different world than the world we grew up in. When I started giving talks about AI for K-12, I got some skepticism from professional AI people. They said, why do you need to introduce kids to AI in kindergarten? And my answer was, we're not introducing them to AI in kindergarten. By the time they get to kindergarten, these kids have spent 2 years talking to Alexa. So they're surrounded by AI in their everyday life in ways that we were not. Their parents are driving cars. Even if they're not self-driving cars, they have driver assistance features. Their phones are full of AI. And so kids are going to have a very different perception of AI than adults do. And I do think we can learn something by seeing how they think about the AI systems in their lives. What we want them to come away with as a result of this effort is we want them to think in terms of things they can do. So it's not just, oh, here's this really smart computer. It's, oh, I can make a computer that responds to my voice commands. I can make a computer that will recognize objects that I've taught it to recognize. And that's a totally different mindset than the older adults who, when I grew up, you had to be a PhD in computer science to get a computer to tell thumbs up from thumbs down. That's never going to be the case again, right? We're never going back there. And so I think, the way kids think about AI is something we should be studying.
So the next question is, do you remember a moment that made you the most proud of the results of this initiative?
That's a great question. Um, People are teaching AI now. I mean, they're not waiting for us to complete these guidelines. And so I have a AI programming framework of my own called Calypso, Calypso. And so I've seen kids use Calypso to produce their own AI applications. And I've just been tremendously motivated by that, by seeing what even young kids can do with Calypso. So Calypso has built-in speech recognition. It's got some computer vision built in. And so seeing kids actually build AI applications using my tool, and there are other great tools out there as well. I'm really excited when I see that.
Mm-hmm. We also have a question from Mikołaj. How old were you when you began learning AI?
I think I was about 14 or 15. So I taught myself programming at 12, and at 14 I started working for a computer company part-time. So I'm an outlier. So yeah, I'm 62 now, so I've been doing AI for a long time.